So the Third Reich and roll, I'll be honest, like when I open through the book and I'm looking at it, and my wife is sitting next to me, she's like, "What is that? You know, what's with all the swastika art? You know, what was the response to the visual art of this album? Because even today, well, I feel like especially today,
I think it's more so today than it was then.
Yeah.
You know, there was a strong response in some ways. A lot of people didn't think that much about it, really. I mean, you know, there was a record store in Berkeley that was one of the first ones to, prominently display and promote Residents music, and it was called Rather Rip Records. Sounds like a Berkeley record store, right?
Yeah.
And so they gave us a store window, which I designed. There are probably pictures from it in here. I won't take the time to thumb through it, but they're probably in there. And in essence, there was a series of promo photos of the Residents, and I'm sure they're in here, where essentially they have swastikas this big
On their faces. Right?
Yeah, and you can see their faces.
I think I could find it.
Yeah, peeking through the hole, and it's like just this face with sunglasses and this giant swastika.
Right.
And so ultimately, I picked out
These guys, and they're doing the Heil Hitler too.
Yeah, right. And I mean, this is humor. I mean, this is all satire from their point of view. I mean, the whole album.
Can you hold it a little higher?
Yeah, sure. The whole album. Part of the statement that the album makes is what the Residents considered as the fascism of rock and roll. How ultimately music, when they were all younger, was much broader, but everybody soon came to realize that if you put a rock beat to something, you sell a lot more copies. And so it's almost like everything from country and western to gospel to jazz, whatever, all became in a way sort of a variation of rock. And so they were making a statement about that fascistic influence of rock and roll on the music world in general. And so once again, that's what this is. It's all part of that kind of satirical statement. But anyway, so the window gets put up, and there's one of these pictures, that's like 8 feet tall there, and for some reason, I have no idea why at this point, it just seemed like fun at the time, we made all of these like baby mummies. So they're like baby dolls that you would go to some thrift store and get, and wrapped them up in gauze and then hung them so that they're hanging in space, in that window in front of this gigantic Resident with a swastika head. And needless to say, the outcry in Berkeley was strong and swift.
Do you believe the Residents were trying to do this to provoke? Or?
No, honestly, I think they were kind of naive.
Really?
I mean, they were certainly aware of the
I mean, you can't deny the swastika meant tens of millions of people. Like, that's what the association was. And this was not... we're 60, 70 years past the war now. But
yeah, but from their point of view, this was the mid-'70s. That was 30 years ago. Right. That was an eternity ago. I mean, once again, the irony is that now it's 50 years later, right? And it's worse than ever.
Right.
But once again, they were not unaware of the provocative nature of the content, but at the same time, were not really prepared. I think they were slightly naive in terms of how strong it was. It's and once again, it obviously still is.
Yeah. So, do you have any sort of comments on, I guess, how this would be received today? Like, I mean, the Residents still have their anonymity, but like, could the Residents still express themselves in these provocative ways, or is there any sort of, do you feel like they've been influenced in any way by cancel culture or whatever it is that's going on today, you know?
Well, yeah, to some extent. I mean, a perfect example, really, and this just happened last week. Are you familiar with Night Flight?
Yeah, I wanted to ask about the Night Flight project.
Okay. Well, I've personally had more people tell me they were exposed to the Residents through Night Flight than any other single source.
Wow.
And Night Flight was a TV program on USA Cable, I think, from like 81 to 87 or 88, and they featured the Residents pretty prominently. So they went off the air. I don't know what they did for a while, but they eventually came back as a website, and then resurrected themselves yet again as a streaming service, as Night Flight Plus. And so last summer, they had their 40th anniversary.
Right.
And they asked the Residents to create some kind of program in celebration of their 40th anniversary. Well, they were in rehearsal for...
the Residents or Night Flight?
The Residents were in rehearsal,
Okay.
For a tour that, for all practical purposes, never happened. There have been 5 tours that have either been canceled or postponed, rescheduled in the last 2 years. And this was going to be the 50th anniversary tour. So, as part of the 50th anniversary, they're reflecting back.
Sure.
And, Duck Stab, which came out in 77 or 78, has remained one of their more popular albums. So they're going to do the Duck Stab album as part of this 50th anniversary show. So when Night Flight made the offer, it's like, well, let's do Duck Stab. They were in rehearsal. It was kind of ready to go. So they went into a recording studio, very nice recording studio in Oakland. But they spent 3 days in this recording studio, playing the whole album, and we're working with a tremendous, extremely creative video artist, a guy named John Sanborn, that they've worked with off and on during the years, but they've been working with him a lot more recently. And it's a really, really beautiful, strong piece. Well, Stuart Shapiro, who is Mr. Night Flight, had the idea of creating some NFTs from some of the video shot of the Duck Stab Alive. And so those were posted either a week ago today or into the previous week, one or the other. And, for me, I'm not. The words "mourning in person" are never associated with me in any kind of valid way whatsoever.
Hopefully more mourning than person. You seem very personable.
Yeah. Well, person is okay, but mourning in person does not connect. So anyway, I had not had my first cup of coffee yet when I get an email from Laurie Murray, who's worked with the Residents for years and years, and she does some of their social media posting, anti-social media, as I often refer to it. And it's like there was just this outcry, of Residents, money-grabbing Residents. I never thought they'd do anything like this and whatever. And she included one of them, one of the posts. And it was the most negative thing I've ever read about the Residents, period. And then before I had a chance to absorb that, I got an email from Stuart Shapiro, who's getting exactly the same thing.
Right.
So we kind of went back and forth about it, and ultimately decided at the end of last week to pull them.
You pulled them.
Yeah.
I loved the response. The Residents had the response about, we have bills to pay, we've had 5 tours canceled, shut up, we're doing what we can.
Yeah.
But you ended up pulling them?
It was kind of a consensus.
Yeah.
It was kind of a consensus.
And was the concern the money grab, or was it the environmental aspects, or all of it, or?
Well, I mean, the residents are nothing if not responsible, and were ultimately part of the plan was to deal with the environmental part in terms of buying carbon offsets. But I mean, it just felt like the whole NFT thing is too ambiguous with a lot of negative energy around it these days. It's not that the residents aren't interested, because they are, but ultimately, I mean, and once again, they didn't generate this.
Right.
This came from somebody else, and they still want to enter into that arena, but want to do it more on their own terms. I'll put it that way, rather than feel like what they're doing is adding to the confusion that's already out there.
Right. Okay. Well, that's, I mean, it's interesting to see how bold the residents have always been. And I'm not saying they're suddenly weak or something like that. Like, I don't see this as a capitulation. It's just more like the fans are the people who have supported this group of artists, who have spoken vocally about all sorts of things. I mean, some Tweedles, the lyrics, the Tweedles. If you put that up against NFTs, kind of like, really? So it's just surprising to me to see an uproar about anything the residents do, when I can open up and see, 4 people with wearing swastikas on their heads doing Heil Hitler, making fun of rock and roll.
Yeah.
So it was pretty surprising to me to see the uproar in the first place. I think the residents have always pushed the boundaries of what was technologically available.
Yeah, and once again, it's like, it's not so much that they are retreating as they are tabling it.
Yeah.
For now,
right.
to kind of sit back and rethink things.
Okay.
I mean, they have an NFT project in mind. That's pretty interesting and pretty massive. But they're kind of sitting back and looking to see how things play out. I mean, the NFL is making NFTs at this point.
Right.
I mean, I'm sure McDonald's is making NFTs. It's like, I think it's more that they felt like that wasn't necessarily the right entry point for them, and they're kind of looking for that.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.